Hi automotive enthusiasts, welcome to Cam and Crank, where today we're diving into the story of one of the most ferocious motorcycles of the modern era, the 2004 Kawasaki Ninja ZX-10R. This wasn't just another sport bike entering the scene. It was a machine that Kawasaki built to shake up the superbike world, a radical answer to rivals that had been grabbing attention on both road and track. What made this motorcycle different was its uncompromising mission, to push performance further, to blur the line between race machines and road bikes, and to prove that Kawasaki could still deliver a fearsome contender in an intensely competitive class. To set the stage, imagine the early 2000s, a golden age for leader-class superbikes with Yamaha, Honda, and Suzuki refining their flagships year after year. Riders and reviewers alike debated which brand truly held the crown. Kawasaki had been quiet for a while in the top tier, but in 2004 they returned with a weapon so extreme it quickly earned both admiration and fear. Lightweight frame geometry designed for razor-sharp handling, an inline-4 engine cranking out nearly 175 horsepower at the crank, and styling that made no apologies. This was Kawasaki declaring they weren't here to play safe. But raw numbers only tell part of the story. The ZX-10R was engineered with an edge that demanded skill and nerve. For some riders, it became the ultimate thrill ride, offering an intoxicating mix of speed and precision. For others, it was a motorcycle that seemed almost too wild, a machine that could bite back if not treated with respect. That tension between power and control is what defines the legend of the 2004 Ninja, and it's why we're exploring it in depth today. Across this video, we'll trace how the ZX-10R burst onto the scene, how it redefined expectations of what a leader bike could be, and how its legacy shaped the superbike battles that followed. We'll uncover the design decisions, the cultural impact, and the rider experiences that turned this machine into a cult icon. Whether you're a seasoned rider, a fan of motorcycle history, or simply someone fascinated by machines that push limits, the story of the 2004 Ninja has something for you. Stay with me as we peel back the layers of Kawasaki's track-ready monster, because by the end, you'll see why this bike wasn't just fast. It was a moment in time when performance, risk, and reputation collided in unforgettable ways. When Kawasaki unveiled the Ninja ZX-10R in 2004, the world of sport bikes immediately shifted. This wasn't a gradual evolution, it was a shockwave. Riders who had grown used to the incremental gains of the previous few years suddenly faced a motorcycle that ripped the expectations wide open. The engineers at Kawasaki weren't interested in blending into the superbike market. They wanted to dominate it, and they were willing to take risks to achieve that goal. The bike's DNA was steeped in track aggression. Kawasaki's design team pursued a philosophy of lightweight agility paired with explosive power. At just over 375 pounds dry, the ZX-10R was lighter than its rivals, yet it carried one of the most powerful engines in its class. Every ounce trimmed was intentional, every angle sharpened for speed. The aim was clear: make a leader-class machine that handled more like a 600 but hit harder than anything else on the grid. Micro story. The genesis of the ZX-10R began in the late 1990s, when Kawasaki realized they were slipping behind in the arms race of leader bikes. Competitors were launching increasingly advanced models, and Kawasaki's flagship offerings, while respected, weren't setting new benchmarks. A small group of engineers inside the company decided that the next machine had to reset the entire game. They sketched a blueprint that called for radical weight reduction, aggressive geometry, and an engine that would deliver not just top-end power, but brutal acceleration across the rev range. It was a gamble, to make a bike that was less forgiving but infinitely more thrilling. That gamble would define Kawasaki's place in the superbike wars. As the project evolved, Kawasaki leaned heavily on its racing expertise. The lessons learned from World Superbike and MotoGP filtered directly into the street-legal ZX-10R. Adjustable suspension, radial-mounted brakes, and a compact engine layout were all influenced by racing machines. It wasn't just about speed in a straight line. It was about control when a rider pushed the limits lap after lap. Context digest. The early 2000s were a unique moment for motorcycle technology. Electronics hadn't yet taken over in the way they do today, so rider skill remained the ultimate traction control system. Manufacturers poured resources into refining chassis stiffness, power delivery, and aerodynamics. Kawasaki saw an opening. Instead of playing catch-up, they could leapfrog the competition by embracing a wilder, more aggressive design philosophy. This decision would prove polarizing. but it gave the ZX-10R its distinctive personality. Microstory. In 2003, just before the ZX-10R's release, Kawasaki invited select journalists to preview the bike. Many walked away stunned by what they saw. The aggressive stance, sharp lines, and narrow frame gave the bike a menacing presence. One rider described simply rolling it off the stand as an adrenaline rush. The bike felt smaller than a liter class should, almost like it was waiting to spring. By the time the first rides happened, impressions had solidified. Kawasaki had built something leaner, meaner, and more radical than its peers. That early buzz turned into a wave of anticipation that made the 2004 release a headline event in the motorcycle world. Reflection bridge. Beneath the excitement, however, lurked an essential question. Could average riders handle a machine so finely tuned for track aggression? When the ZX-10R finally hit the road, it confirmed every suspicion about its character. The bike was brutally fast, capable of sprinting from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Its short wheelbase and stiff suspension made it dive into corners with lightning precision. For riders with the skill to harness it, the machine was intoxicating. But for those unprepared, it could feel twitchy, even dangerous. This duality, exhilaration and intimidation, became the defining trait of the 2004 ZX-10R. Context digest. Kawasaki's approach wasn't entirely without precedent. In the past, brands like Suzuki had produced bikes with reputations for rawness, such as the early GSX-Rs. But the difference here was that Kawasaki pushed the formula even further, creating a leader bike that handled with the sharpness of a middleweight. The market had seen fast motorcycles before, but few combined such lightness with such unrelenting power. This was not evolution. It was revolution. Microstory. At tracks across the United States, early adopters of the ZX-10R found themselves both thrilled and tested. In one notable case, a privateer racer swapped his older Honda for the Kawasaki and immediately shaved seconds off his lap times. The lighter frame and explosive engine gave him confidence to attack corners and straights in ways he hadn't before. Yet he also admitted the bike demanded total focus. A single lapse in concentration could send him off the racing line. That balance of reward and risk captured what the ZX-10R was all about, a machine that would give you everything if you gave it everything. Kawasaki didn't shy away from marketing the ZX-10R as a beast meant for serious riders. Ads emphasized its racing pedigree, its uncompromising design, and its readiness to dominate. For many enthusiasts, this message was irresistible. The Ninja name already carried a legacy of speed and style, and now it was tied to a bike that promised to outgun the competition. Reflection bridge. The buzz, however, brought with it growing debates. Was Kawasaki pushing the boundaries of performance too far for everyday riders? Context digest. Reviewers often split into two camps. Some praised the ZX-10R as the most exciting superbike money could buy, celebrating its unmatched power-to-weight ratio and razor handling. Others cautioned that its twitchy front end and explosive throttle response made it less forgiving than rivals. These conflicting viewpoints only fueled the motorcycle's reputation as something dangerous yet desirable, a machine you both respected and feared. Microstory. Stories began to circulate among riders' groups. In one town, a local rider became known for mastering the ZX-10R on weekend track days, his lap times eclipsing others on supposedly easier bikes. He became a kind of folk hero in his circle, the guy who tamed Kawasaki's wild beast. Yet in the same group, another rider sold his ZX-10R after only a few months, claiming it was simply too much bike. These tales highlighted the dividing line between those who thrived on its challenge and those who felt overwhelmed. As 2004 progressed, the ZX-10R's legend grew. Sales were strong, and Kawasaki's gamble paid off. They had re-established themselves at the forefront of the leader-class wars, forcing rivals to rethink their strategies. Yamaha and Honda responded with refinements aimed at balancing power and control, but Kawasaki had made its point. They weren't just back in the game, they were leading it. The stage was now set for deeper questions. How did the ZX-10R's wild reputation shape its legacy, and what impact did it have on the industry at large? To answer that, we need to look at the broader consequences that unfolded after its release. The aftermath of the ZX-10R's debut in 2004 was more than just a sales story. It was a cultural shockwave within motorcycling. Kawasaki had introduced a machine so sharp and so unforgiving that it challenged riders to reconsider what they wanted from a superbike. While some flocked to it, others hesitated, unsure if they could or should tame something with such raw intent. This tension between exhilaration and intimidation carried into every discussion about the bike and gave it an aura few machines ever achieve. At track days across the country, the ZX-10R quickly became a measuring stick. Riders who showed up with one were often met with a mix of admiration and caution from their peers. If they handled it well, respect followed. If not, the bike's reputation for punishing mistakes was only reinforced. Kawasaki had effectively built not just a machine, but an identity test for enthusiasts. Were you capable of taming the monster? Micro story. In California, one amateur racer gained local fame for consistently finishing at the front of regional events aboard his ZX-10R. What set him apart wasn't just speed. It was how he embraced the bike's demanding nature. He spoke about learning to ride with more precision, to respect the razor-thin line between control and chaos. His success became a small but telling example of what the ZX-10R offered, a path to growth for those willing to adapt, but only if they had the nerve to commit. As these stories spread, rival manufacturers began to take note. Honda, long known for balancing performance with accessibility, responded by emphasizing stability and user-friendliness in their flagship. Yamaha, whose R1 had already been a track darling, focused on refining handling dynamics. Kawasaki, by contrast, leaned into its identity as the brand willing to go further, faster, and wilder. Context Digest. The early 2000s represented the last true era of purely analog superbikes. Rider aids like traction control and wheelie management hadn't yet trickled down into production motorcycles. This meant the ZX-10R existed in a transitional moment when sheer rider skill was the ultimate arbiter of performance. Today, electronics would tame its wild edges, but in 2004, the experience was raw, direct, and utterly unfiltered. That's part of why it remains so vividly remembered. Micro story. On the other side of the spectrum, in Florida, a rider sold his ZX-10R less than a year after buying it. Despite years of experience with sport bikes, he admitted the machine's combination of short wheelbase and explosive throttle left him uneasy on public roads. He swapped it for a slightly heavier rival, trading peak performance for peace of mind. His decision echoed a broader sentiment among some enthusiasts. The ZX-10R wasn't for everyone, and that exclusivity only made it more notorious. Reflection bridge. With extremes of praise and criticism swirling, the ZX-10R's identity crystallized as a bike that defined what it meant to walk the fine line between brilliance and excess. Media coverage amplified this dual image. Magazines declared it a technical triumph, yet often included cautionary notes for less experienced riders. Testers marveled at lap times but admitted the bike demanded constant focus. The contradiction only made it more alluring. Was this Kawasaki's greatest achievement or its riskiest gamble? Either way, the ZX-10R refused to be ignored. Context Digest. In motorcycle culture, machines often carry reputations that outlive their production cycles. The Suzuki Hayabusa became synonymous with top speed, the Honda CBR 900RR with pioneering lightweight power. The 2004 ZX-10R carved its place as the untamed superbike, the one that separated daring riders from cautious ones. Such reputations aren't created by marketing alone. They're forged in the experiences of thousands of riders, shared through stories, forums, and trackside conversations. Micro story. In Europe, one magazine staged a head-to-head shootout between the ZX-10R and its chief rivals. On lap times alone, the Kawasaki edged out the competition, proving that its formula worked on the stopwatch. But the testers ranked it second overall, behind a slightly slower but more forgiving competitor. The takeaway was clear: the Kawasaki was the fastest but not necessarily the friendliest. That nuance helped cement its cult appeal. Riders who wanted the ultimate challenge gravitated toward it. Reflection bridge. The question then became, what lasting impact did this motorcycle have on the industry and on the riders who dared to master it? As years passed, the ZX-10R's influence stretched beyond its sales figures. Competitors couldn't ignore the pressure it created, leading to a new wave of superbikes that tried to balance Kawasaki's raw aggression with everyday usability. Manufacturers accelerated their research into electronic rider aids, recognizing that sheer horsepower and lightweight frames could only go so far before safety became a concern. Micro story. A decade later, in interviews with engineers, some admitted that the 2004 ZX-10R had scared them, not because of its flaws, but because it revealed just how far motorcycle performance could be pushed without electronic safety nets. It became a case study in limits, showing both what was possible and what was perhaps too much for the average rider. That legacy influenced the direction of entire model lineups across multiple brands, making the ZX-10R a turning point rather than just another chapter. Context digest. By the mid-2000s, the superbike market was evolving rapidly. Electronics began trickling in, and with them came new expectations of control and confidence. Kawasaki itself would eventually embrace these technologies, but the 2004 ZX-10R remained a reminder of the moment before the shift. It stood as a monument to rider skill, to mechanical purity, and to the thrill of mastering something just on the edge of chaos. For riders who experienced it firsthand, the ZX-10R left indelible memories. Some recall it as the bike that taught them respect for raw power. Others see it as the ultimate thrill, unmatched even today. And for Kawasaki, it marked the rebirth of their reputation in the superbike wars. The influence of this motorcycle didn't fade. Instead, it evolved, shaping how the company and its rivals designed the future. Which brings us to the most lasting chapter of its story, how the ZX-10R's reputation turned into a legacy that still defines Kawasaki's superbike identity. The reputation of the 2004 ZX-10R didn't end when the model year passed. Instead, it hardened into legend. Riders spoke of it as the wild child of the leader class, a motorcycle that demanded respect but gave back more than most could imagine. Kawasaki's gamble on aggression had paid off, but it also created a burden. How do you follow up a machine that had so thoroughly reset expectations? The company chose to double down. Later generations of the ZX-10R would refine the formula, adding electronic aids, aerodynamic tweaks, and more manageable power delivery. But the shadow of the 2004 model always loomed large. Every new Ninja was judged against it, and every rider who swung a leg over a newer version was reminded of the bike that started the modern era of Kawasaki superbikes. Micro-story. In Japan, Kawasaki insiders later admitted that the 2004 model was intentionally built as a statement piece. They wanted to announce to the world that Kawasaki was no longer in the business of conservative updates. The engineering team knew the bike would polarize, but they also knew it would re-establish the brand as bold and fearless. Their instincts proved correct. Sales were solid, but more importantly, the ZX-10R redefined how enthusiasts saw the company, not as a follower, but as a leader willing to embrace risk. Context digest. The years following 2004 saw a technological arms race among superbike manufacturers. Traction control, ride-by-wire throttles, quick shifters, and eventually semi-active suspension systems became common. These features made bikes faster and safer, but they also tamed some of the raw character that had defined the early 2000s. In this shift, the 2004 ZX-10R became more than just a motorcycle. It became a reference point for what pure, unassisted performance felt like. Micro-story. A rider in Texas who kept his 2004 model well into the 2010s became a fixture at local meets. Surrounded by newer, more advanced machines, his bike always drew a crowd. Younger enthusiasts, raised on electronics and digital dashboards, were amazed by how simple and mechanical the ZX-10R seemed. When he fired it up, the sound and feel spoke of a different era. For many, it was their first exposure to a superbike that relied entirely on the rider. That living reminder of the past highlighted the legacy the 2004 model carried. Reflection bridge. As decades passed, the question shifted from whether the ZX-10R was too wild to whether we would ever see its kind again. For collectors, the 2004 Ninja became a sought-after model. Its sharp styling, minimalist electronics, and reputation for ferocity made it stand out in garages otherwise filled with increasingly sophisticated machines. Auction prices began creeping upward, a sign that enthusiasts recognized its historical value. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was acknowledgement that the ZX-10R had captured lightning in a bottle. Context digest. In the broader arc of motorcycle history, certain models become turning points. The Honda CB750 defined the birth of the superbike. The Suzuki Hayabusa became the speed icon. And the Kawasaki Ninja ZX-10R of 2004 marked the point when superbikes crossed into a new era of precision and danger. Each turning point changed how riders and manufacturers thought about what was possible, and each continues to influence design philosophies today. Micro-story. At an anniversary event, Kawasaki brought out a pristine 2004 ZX-10R alongside its latest model, Journalists who rode both back-to-back were stunned by the contrast. The new bike was faster on paper, safer, and more forgiving. Yet many said the older machine felt more alive. That visceral connection, demanding, raw, thrilling, was something electronics could never replicate. Their write-ups didn't diminish the new model. Rather, they elevated the old one as a timeless reminder of what riding used to mean. As these perspectives accumulated, the legend of the 2004 ZX-10R transcended statistics. It became a symbol of an era when manufacturers pushed boundaries without nets, when riders tested themselves against unfiltered machines, and when Kawasaki chose boldness over caution. Reflection Bridge. The lesson that remains is not just about motorcycles, but about how risk, vision, and timing can reshape an industry. The ZX-10R's influence continues in Kawasaki's dominance on racetracks worldwide, especially in the World Superbike Championship, where later versions carried the torch. Every victory carries a thread that traces back to 2004, to the moment Kawasaki reminded the world who they were. For riders, the bike remains a benchmark of courage, skill, and thrill. And for the motorcycle community, it stands as proof that sometimes the most important machines are not the safest or the easiest, but the ones that challenge us to rise to their level. The legacy of the 2004 Kawasaki Ninja ZX-10R is more than horsepower figures or lap times. It's a story about ambition, about pushing boundaries, and about creating something unforgettable. And that is why decades later people still talk about it not just as a motorcycle, but as a monster that defined its moment. The story of the 2004 Kawasaki Ninja ZX-10R leaves us with a fascinating blend of achievement, controversy, and enduring influence. It was a motorcycle that arrived at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way, to shake an entire segment of the industry. Kawasaki didn't just release another superbike, they delivered a lightning bolt, and the shock of it continues to echo through the culture of motorcycling. What stands out most is how the ZX-10R embodied contradiction. It was brutally fast yet agile, approachable in design yet intimidating in performance, beloved by some and feared by others. That paradox is precisely what gave it staying power. Riders who mastered it walked away with stories they would tell for years. Riders who chose not to wrestle with its extremes still respected it from a distance. The 2004 Ninja wasn't trying to please everyone. It was designed to redefine what was possible. Its broader legacy is about more than performance. The ZX-10R represents a moment in time when motorcycles pushed as close to the edge as possible before electronics became a standard safety net. It captures the raw spirit of an era that demanded courage and skill above all. Today's superbikes are faster and more sophisticated, but they ride on the foundation the 2004 model laid. Without that bold step, the superbike wars of the 2000s might have evolved very differently. For Kawasaki, it was the statement they needed to make. The Ninja name had long carried weight, but this was the model that reasserted dominance, reminding the world that the company was unafraid of risk. That daring spirit still defines Kawasaki's identity today, whether on track or in showrooms. For enthusiasts, the lesson of the ZX-10R is about respect. For the machine, for the craft of riding, and for the fine line between power and control. It reminds us that motorcycling is not just about reaching destinations, but about experiencing the full spectrum of challenge and exhilaration along the way. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the 2004 Kawasaki Ninja ZX-10R. This has been a journey through engineering ambition, cultural impact, and the kind of legacy that outlives the metal itself. Machines like this don't just pass through history, they carve their place into it. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.